I hadn't been home in 5 years. Not since that Christmas Eve when my father looked me dead in the eye and said, "You'll never amount to anything, Claire. You're worthless." His words had cut so deep that night I swore I'd never come back. But life has a strange sense of timing. This year I came home carrying something that would change everything, a secret letter in my bag and a headline no one in my family saw coming. The snow crunched under my boots as I stepped onto the circular driveway of the Matthews estate. The same mansion that once hosted glittering Christmas parties for the press now stood quiet, its lights dimmed. My hands shook, not from the cold, but from what waited inside. When I opened the front door, the smell of pine and bourbon hit me like a memory I didn't ask for. My brother Andrew was the first to see me. He froze mid-conversation, champagne glass in hand. "Well, look who decided to show up," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. My mother Evelyn turned from the fire, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Claire," she said softly, "we didn't think you'd come." I smiled, a practiced, polite curve of my lips. "Merry Christmas, Mom." Before she could answer, another voice filled the room, low, controlled, and cold. "So my father said, stepping down the grand staircase, 'The prodigal disappointment returns.'" The entire room went still. I hadn't seen Charles Matthews in half a decade, but the sight of him still made my stomach tighten. His silver hair was thinner, his frame slightly stooped, but his eyes, sharp, assessing, and cruel, hadn't aged a day. "Hello, Dad," I managed. He crossed the room slowly, studying me the way he used to study quarterly reports, looking for weaknesses. "Still chasing those little tech fantasies?" he asked. "Or have you finally decided to get a real job?" I wanted to laugh. Instead, I said, "It's going well." He smirked. "Right. Just like your last 3 startups, I imagine. The world's youngest failure. Still selling little digital snake oil, are we?" The words hit harder than I expected. For a moment, I almost forgot the letter hidden inside my bag, the one that would change the course of his perfect empire. But not tonight. Not yet. Revenge, like Christmas, was best served with patience. "Dinner's ready," my mother interrupted, her voice brittle. The table was set like a magazine spread, crystal glasses, gold flatware candles flickering over platters of roast beef and rosemary potatoes. The same meal we'd had every year since I was a child, except this time I wasn't part of the picture. The laughter was forced, the conversation hollow. My father dominated it all, boasting about the family's latest media acquisition, his words echoing through the marble dining hall like a sermon. "So, Claire," he said, slicing into his steak without looking at me, still freeloading off that startup nonsense. "What was it called again? Voice? Something Voice Link?" I said evenly. Andrew laughed, not a pleasant laugh, and polished a spot on his gold flatware with his napkin. "Oh, right. That app nobody uses." I set my fork down. "Actually, investors are interested. We just closed another round of funding." My father leaned back, amused. "Funding? You mean donations from dreamers who don't know better?" He took a slow sip of wine, eyes glinting. "When I was your age, I'd already built the Matthews Media Group. You, on the other hand, built a website." The room laughed, his kind of laughter, sharp and obedient. Even my mother looked away, her silence complicated. I swallowed hard. "You built your empire by silencing people. I'm building mine by giving them a voice." The words slipped out before I could stop them. My father's jaw tightened. "Careful, Claire. You're still eating at my table." "For now," I whispered. He didn't hear me, or maybe he did, and chose to ignore it. By dessert, my brother was bragging about his promotion, my mother was pretending to care, and my father was already on his second glass of bourbon. The same pattern, the same hierarchy: father, the king mother, the ghost, Andrew the heir, and me, the exile who dared to come home. When the plates were cleared, I excused myself, heading upstairs toward my old room. The walls were lined with family portraits: Charles shaking hands with politicians, Andrew in his college graduation gown, Evelyn smiling through the performance of perfection. And me, the youngest, always positioned at the edge, almost cropped out of every frame. Inside my room, everything was untouched. My old trophies, my college acceptance letters, even the childhood teddy bear still sitting on the shelf, frozen in time, like the family's favorite version of me, invisible and harmless. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled the envelope from my bag, and stared at it. It was sealed in crimson wax, embossed with the crest of Time magazine. Tomorrow morning, that very crest would appear on newsstands across the world with my face on the cover. Headline: The World's Youngest Innovator. Claire Matthews and the Tech Revolution Changing Media Integrity. I traced the edge of the letter with my thumb, adrenaline rising. It wasn't just validation. It was poetic symmetry. The daughter he called worthless, now the woman redefining the empire he corrupted. But this wasn't about revenge alone. It was about truth, about reclaiming the voice they spent years trying to silence. A knock came at the door. It was my mother. "Claire," she said quietly, "your father's temper. He doesn't mean everything he says." I looked at her. Really looked at her. The faint tremor in her hands, the years of pretending peace in a war she'd never left. "You've been saying that my whole life," I said softly. "Maybe it's time someone did mean what they say." Her eyes flickered pain pride. Maybe both. Then she left, without another word. I turned off the light and stood by the window. Outside, the snow fell in perfect silence, blanketing the estate like a confession. Somewhere downstairs, I heard my father's laughter again, loud, confident, sure that the world still belonged to him. Tomorrow, his world would end. I slid the envelope back into my bag, the thick paper cool against my palm. I went to the window, watching the silent snow fall over his flawless estate. Instead, for the first time in 5 years, I smiled not from forgiveness, but from cold, absolute certainty. The tables weren't just about to turn. They had already been set for my game. The house was silent the next morning, the kind of heavy quiet that follows too much wine and too many unsaid things. My father's voice no longer echoed through the halls, but it lingered in my head, sharp metallic cutting through the fragile peace of dawn. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, sunlight seeping through the half-open curtains. The letter was still in my bag, its red wax seal glinting faintly in the light. My fingers hovered over it, trembling with the same mix of fear and defiance I'd felt the night before. Downstairs, I could hear the muffled sound of dishes and my mother's cautious movements. The scent of coffee and cinnamon floated up, deceptively warm. I slipped the letter back into my bag, zipped it closed, and headed down. "Morning," she said, not looking up from the counter. Her tone was neutral, professional, like she was speaking to a client, not her daughter. "Morning," I replied. She handed me a cup. "Your father's out. Went to the club early. Andrew's still asleep." "Of course," I said, taking a sip. The coffee was bitter, overbrewed. She hesitated. "He didn't mean—" "Yes, he did," I interrupted softly. Her eyes flickered. For a moment she looked like she might argue, then she just sighed and turned back to the sink. Silence settled again, thick and familiar. On the kitchen counter sat the morning paper, folded open to the business section. My father's name in bold letters. Matthews Media expands international reach. His smile stared back at me, polished, powerful, perfectly detached. It was the face of a man who believed his words held final authority, a man who just last night had dismissed his own flesh and blood as a failure. The hypocrisy made my skin crawl. "I'm heading into town," I said, setting the mug down. "Claire, I'll be back before dinner." I didn't wait for her to finish. Outside, the air bit my cheeks as I walked to my rental car. The sky was a pale, washed-out gray snowflake swirling like ghosts. I turned the key in the ignition and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Breathe. Just breathe. It had been 5 years since I left this town. 5 years since I'd sat in that same driveway, tears freezing on my face as my father's voice followed me into the night. I'd built my life from those ashes, first with stubbornness, then with vision. VoiceLink had started in a cramped apartment in Seattle, running on instant noodles and secondhand hardware. It was supposed to be small, just a platform for whistleblowers and journalists to share stories without fear of censorship. But then it grew. By the time I'd received the letter from Time, VoiceLink was already being called the conscience of modern media. It had everything my father's empire lacked: truth, transparency, and purpose. He didn't know any of that yet. Not until tomorrow. I parked near the Old Town Square and walked toward the small cafe I used to escape to as a teenager. It looked the same: chipped paint, fogged windows, the smell of vanilla and espresso. I ordered my usual and found a quiet corner seat, the kind I used to hide in when I was a kid. My hands were still shaking as I pulled the envelope from my bag, the thick paper a solid, tangible thing in my palm. The wax cracked like a heartbeat. Inside, the formal words were just as I remembered them, but now seeing them in this place, they felt different. They weren't just a promise of success. They were a declaration of war. Time magazine proudly announces its upcoming cover feature, the world's youngest innovator, Claire Matthews, founder of VoiceLink, the platform redefining truth in journalism. My chest tightened. There was also a note from the editor written in blue ink at the bottom: Claire, your work represents the future of media integrity. The world needs more voices like yours. For a moment, my vision blurred. Not from pride, something deeper, almost grief. I closed the letter, pressing it to my chest. This wasn't just validation, it was vindication. The cafe door chimed. I looked up and froze. Andrew. He spotted me immediately, a smirk spreading across his face. Well, look who's hiding out. I'm not hiding, I said. He pulled out a chair without asking and sat across from me. Dad's furious, by the way. Says you embarrassed him with that little speech last night. I took a breath, steady. He embarrassed himself. Andrew laughed low and cold. You really don't get it, do you? You don't win against Dad. You never did. You left and he still owns this family. Not for long, I said before I could stop myself. He tilted his head, suspicious. What's that supposed to mean? I folded the letter before he could see it. Nothing. Uh-huh, he said, leaning back. You've always had this fantasy, like you're some kind of underdog hero. Newsflash. Claire, you're not. You're the screw-up who ran away. Something inside me went still. Maybe, I said quietly, but you'll remember this Christmas for the rest of your life. He frowned. What's that supposed to? I've got to go. I grabbed my coat and left before he could finish. Outside, the snow had thickened. My boots crunched through it as I walked, heart pounding. The town looked almost cinematic: garlands in shop windows, carolers on the corner, but I felt detached, like I was walking through someone else's memory. By the time I reached the car, my phone buzzed. A message from Patricia, my lawyer and closest friend. Patricia, everything's ready. Times embargo lifts at 9 a.m. tomorrow. They'll run the digital cover. First print hits the stands by noon. Me. Perfect, Patricia. You sure you want to do this during Christmas? Me. That's the point. I tucked the phone away, the smallest smile tugging at my lips. When I got back to the estate, twilight had already fallen. The house glowed softly under strings of white lights, picture perfect from the outside, poisoned at its core. My father was in his study when I passed the doorway, a glass of bourbon in hand, voice booming over a speakerphone call. If that report leaks, heads will roll. Do you understand me? The Empire still pretending to be untouchable. I kept walking, went upstairs and sat by my window. Below, I could see my father's office, his silhouette pacing behind the frosted glass. For the first time, he looked small. I reached into my bag, pulled out the letter again, and placed it on the nightstand. Tomorrow morning, the entire world would read my name beside words he'd never thought I'd earn: innovator, visionary, leader. The girl he dismissed as worthless was about to redefine his legacy, and I wouldn't need to raise my voice. Revenge didn't always roar. Sometimes it arrived quietly, wrapped in paper, sealed in wax, and timed perfectly for Christmas morning. Downstairs, I heard laughter, the hollow practice kind I'd grown up with. But I didn't go down. Not tonight. Tonight, I let the silence speak for me. Tomorrow, the world would listen. I woke before dawn. The house was still the kind of silence that carries secrets. The silence settled again, thick and familiar. I went to the window. Down below, my father's Bentley was parked in its usual spot. He'd be awake soon, reading the morning paper in his robe, pretending the world still bowed to him. But this morning, for the first time, it wouldn't. The phone buzzer. Patricia. It's live. My pulse kicked. I opened the browser, and there it was, my face on the homepage of Time, the world's youngest innovator, Claire Matthews, and the platform Redefining Media Truth. For a second, the world blurred. It wasn't just the cover, it was the subheading. Daughter of media mogul Charles Matthews breaks silence with VoiceLink, the company holding news giants accountable. I laughed under my breath, a sharp, disbelieving sound. The words felt heavier than air. I could already imagine my father's expression when he read them, disbelief curdling into rage. By breakfast, my father's empire would be bleeding. And I didn't have to lift a finger. I dressed quickly, pulled on a sweater and coat, and went downstairs. The aroma of coffee hit me as I passed through the hall. Evelyn was already at the table, robe neatly tied, eyes hollow behind her morning calm. She didn't look up when she spoke. "Your father's not in a good mood." "I can imagine," I said. Her gaze flicked toward me, cautious. "Did you do something?" Before I could answer, Charles appeared in the doorway holding his tablet. His expression was thunderous. "You," he said. "Good morning," I replied. He threw the tablet onto the table. The screen froze on the Time cover, my face bright and calm beneath the headline. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. I kept my tone steady. "An interview. About my work. You think this is work? You've just declared war on your own family?" On me, I met his fury with quiet. "No, Dad. You declared war when you built a company on lies." His eyes narrowed the same way they had when I was 16, and caught crying over his insults. "You've always been ungrateful. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me, by humiliating me in front of the entire world. You gave me your name," I said softly, "and I rebuilt it." For a moment, neither of us moved. Evelyn looked between us like a spectator trapped between two fires. Andrew appeared halfway down the stairs, phone in hand. "Dad," he said, panicked. "It's everywhere. The stock's tanking." Charles turned sharply. "Fix it?" Andrew sputtered. I can't. He looked at me like I'd just detonated a bomb. "Claire, what did you do?" "I told the truth." My father slammed his palm on the table, silverware jumping. "You ruined us." "No," I said, stepping closer. My voice calm but firm. "I set us free." He froze, chest heaving. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't anger. It was fear. "You think this makes you powerful?" he hissed. "You think the world will respect you now? They'll use you and discard you just like everyone else, because you're not built to win, Claire. You're built to break." I met his gaze. Then maybe breaking is what this family needed. The silence that followed was absolute. Then from the study I heard a phone ring, sharp and insistent, shattering the calm. Evelyn stood, pressing a hand to her temple. "Why couldn't you just leave it alone?" "Because the truth doesn't stay buried, Mom," I said quietly. "You know that better than anyone." She didn't respond, just turned away, retreating to her rituals of silence. Andrew, still pale, muttered, "You always had to make everything about you." "No," I said, brushing past him. "You just never saw anyone else." I grabbed my coat and left before they could answer. Outside, the cold hit me like an absolution. My phone buzzed again, this time nonstop. Messages from journalists, friends, investors, strangers. One caught my eye. Unknown number. Saw the cover. "Proud of you, kid." Ethan, my mentor. The only person who'd believed in VoiceLink when it was just a dream and a handful of broken code. I smiled. The world was changing, and I could feel it in my bones. As I drove into town, the radio played softly in the background. The host's voice cracked through static, and in breaking news, the Matthews Media Group faces scrutiny this morning after Time magazine published an exposé featuring Charles Matthews' estranged daughter, Claire Matthews. Hearing it aloud was surreal. My name, his shame, the balance tipping. When I parked outside the foundation office, a modest glass building downtown, I saw Patricia waiting at the door. She waved, grinning. "You did it," she said as I stepped out. "We did it," I corrected. Inside, staff buzzed around answering phones and forwarding press requests. On one wall, a TV showed my Time interview playing on repeat. "How's he taking it?" Patricia asked. "As expected," I said. "He's already threatening to sue me." She smirked. "Classic Charles. Don't worry, he won't. He knows any legal battle would expose more dirt." I leaned against the counter, finally letting myself breathe. "It doesn't even feel like revenge anymore." "Then what does it feel like, Justice?" I said after a beat. "Cold, quiet justice." She nodded approvingly. "That's the best kind." I looked out the window. Snow had started again, soft flakes drifting past the glass. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own life. I was no longer the daughter begging to be seen. I was the woman who for the first time felt truly visible. Still deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. The Matthews family never surrendered quietly. The empire would fight back. The betrayal would deepen before it healed. But for now, as the city moved under a blanket of snow, I allowed myself one small, selfish moment of peace. Tomorrow would bring chaos. Tonight I had victory, and it was enough. The silence in the Matthews estate that evening felt different, heavier, sharper. The air carried the chill of humiliation. Every window glowed with soft golden light, but beneath it was something dark electric ready to explode. I knew it the second I stepped back through those double doors. My father's empire had always run on fear. Now that fear had turned inward. The time cover had shattered his control, and when tyrants lose control, they don't collapse quietly, they strike. Evelyn met me in the foyer, still in her pearls and satin blouse like a soldier clinging to old armor. "He's in the study," she whispered. "He's been on calls all day. He hasn't eaten." "I'm not surprised," I said. Her eyes darted to the staircase as if the walls themselves might overhear. "Claire, please don't provoke him." "I didn't provoke him," I replied softly. The truth did. Before she could answer, his voice cut through the air louder, more ragged than I'd ever heard it. "If they think they can smear my name, they'll regret it. I built this industry. I'll destroy every one of them before I let my daughter ruin me." He knew I was there. He wanted me to hear. I walked down the hall past the portraits of ancestors staring down with cold, oil-painted judgment. At the study door, I paused. He stood by the window, phone in hand, whiskey in the other, his reflection fractured by the frost on the glass. "Calling the lawyers already?" I asked. He turned slowly. His eyes, usually sharp, looked bloodshot. "Do you enjoy this?" he said. "Watching your family crumble. Watching everything I built burn." "No," I said quietly. "But maybe it's time something burned." He took a step forward. "You think you're better than me? You think this article makes you a saint? You're just another opportunist who got lucky. The media will chew you up the second they're done using you." I held his gaze. "Maybe. But at least they're listening." He laughed bitterly. "You're your mother's daughter, soft. Emotional. You mistake pity for power." I wanted to walk away. I wanted to stay silent. But something in me snapped. "You know what's ironic," I said. "All my life you told me I was worthless. But without me, the Matthews name would have died in silence. You needed me, Dad. You just never realized it." The glass in his hand shattered. Whiskey splattered across the carpet like blood. He didn't flinch. "Get out," he said, voice low. "Dangerous, gladly." As I turned, his voice followed me colder than the snow outside. "Don't think this is over. You've humiliated this family. You'll regret it." I paused at the door, my pulse steady. "You taught me to keep receipts. I've got plenty." His glare could have burned through steel. When I stepped back into the hall, Evelyn was standing there trembling. "You shouldn't have said that," she whispered. "He's furious." "He's always furious," I said. "This time it's not my fault." She grabbed my wrist. "You don't understand. He's not just angry, he's desperate." The board called. "They're threatening an emergency vote. If he loses control of the company, he'll drag everyone down with him." "Maybe that's what has to happen." Her voice cracked. "He'll take you down too." I looked at her hand gripping mine. So fragile. So afraid. He already tried Mom. 5 years ago. I'm still standing. She let go, defeated. You always think strength is about standing alone. Maybe it is, I said, walking away. Upstairs, the house felt haunted by memory. Every room carried ghosts of dinners, fights, lies wrapped in Christmas ribbons. I stopped at my old bedroom door and hesitated before entering. On the desk sat a silver-framed photo me at 16, standing next to my father at the company gala, both of us smiling for the camera. Behind that smile, I remembered the moment vividly, his whispered words right before the flash. Try not to embarrass me this time. I turned the frame face down. My phone buzzed. Patricia again. Patricia. Just a heads up, your father's people are reaching out to smear VoiceLink. Anonymous leaks. You should be ready. Me. Let them try. I've got the data to prove every story we've ever published. Patricia. Still tighten security. You know how he operates. I did. I knew it too well. When Charles Matthews was cornered, he didn't fight fair. He manipulated, threatened, and buried people under paperwork and fear until they broke. But I wasn't 16 anymore. A soft knock came at my door. Andrew. He didn't look smug this time. He looked shaken. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie half undone. He's losing it, Claire. He's calling investors, screaming at reporters. He told Mom he'd disown us all. He already did, I said. Andrew hesitated. You think you've won, but you don't understand him. When he feels cornered, he'll destroy everything, even the company. You, me, Mom. He'll burn it all down. He can try, I said softly. But what he's trying to destroy is already broken. He just doesn't know it yet. His jaw clenched. You really hate him that much? No, I said softly. I just finally stopped loving the man I thought he was. He stared at me for a long moment before shaking his head. You're playing with fire. Maybe, I said. But I built the extinguisher. He left without another word. I spent the rest of the night at my desk reviewing VoiceLink's encrypted archives, preparing for whatever smear campaign would come next. Every file, every message, every receipt documented, time-stamped, safe. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying whispers of the past, worthless, useless nothing. But I wasn't the same girl anymore. At midnight, I got another message from Patricia. Patricia. One more thing. A journalist from the Herald reached out. They want to run a follow-up story about your father's company. Do you want to comment? I hesitated. Revenge was a slippery slope. I didn't want to drown in the same poison he used on others. Me. No comment. Let the evidence speak. Patricia. Good call. Karma's already working overtime. I smiled. She was right. Downstairs, I heard the faint sound of glass breaking again, another whiskey glass, another night of fury. But this time it didn't shake me. This time the storm was his alone to face. I stood by the window, snow swirling in the moonlight. I wasn't whispering a mantra. I was finally breathing a long, slow exhale that released the anger, the fear, and the girl who had needed his love. He was still downstairs shattering glass. But his rage, his fear, his destruction, it was all his. It was no longer mine to carry. The truth finally had set me free. The headlines came faster than I expected. By morning, every major outlet was echoing the same story: Matthews Media accused of manipulation and misuse of power. The Time cover had set off an avalanche, and now the truth was rolling downhill, crushing everything in its path. I sat at my laptop in the small guest room of the estate, watching the chaos unfold. News anchors debated, analysts speculated, and old employees came forward with confessions they'd kept buried for years. The empire my father had built was collapsing in real time. Part of me felt satisfaction, a deep, quiet vindication, but the other part felt something heavier. Grief, maybe. Not for him, but for what could have been. A soft knock broke my thoughts. It was Evelyn. She looked smaller than usual, like the years had suddenly caught up to her overnight. "Claire, can we talk?" I nodded, closing the laptop. She sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing her robe nervously. He's not eating, she said. Not sleeping. He hasn't left the study since last night. That's not my responsibility, I said evenly. I know, she whispered. But you have to understand. He's built his entire identity around control. Take that away and there's nothing left. I leaned back, crossing my arms. You mean like what he did to me? You watched him tear me apart, Mom. Year after year. And now you expect me to feel sorry for him? Tears glimmered in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She just looked at me hollow. You sound just like him when you say it like that. The words hit harder than I wanted them to. Before I could reply, my phone buzzed. Patricia. Patricia. We have a situation. Me. What kind of situation? Patricia, bank withdrawals. Large ones. Looks like someone's trying to move company funds into private accounts. Offshore. I stood immediately. How much, Patricia? A few million so far, but it's escalating. He's panicking, Claire. If he drains those accounts, there won't be anything left to rebuild with. Of course. Destruction disguised as control. I'll handle it. I typed back. Evelyn watched me. What's wrong? Your husband's trying to bury the evidence with the money, I said, flatly. He's moving funds offshore. She shook her head, disbelief flickering. He wouldn't. Oh, he would, I interrupted. And he has. I grabbed my coat and headed downstairs before she could stop me. The study door was locked, but that never stopped me. I knew where he kept the spare key inside the grandfather clock behind the pendulum. I'd learned that trick when I was 16 and grounded for sneaking out. When I pushed the door open, the room was dim except for the glow of the computer screen. My father sat there, his face pale in the blue light, typing furiously. Planning a little financial getaway, I said. He didn't turn around. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be embezzling from your own company. That made him stop. Slowly he swiveled in his chair, eyes tired but still defiant. You think you understand what this is? I'm protecting what's mine. What our family built. I stepped closer. You mean what you stole? What you manipulated? His voice cracked. I built this empire from nothing. You think you can just walk in here, wave your little article around, and destroy it all? No. I'm moving what's left before the vultures get it. I stared at him, this man who'd once seemed unshakable, now cornered and unraveling. You're not protecting a legacy. You're hoarding your guilt. He stood his hand slamming the desk. You have no idea what it takes to survive in this world. My voice rose to meet his. Neither did I, Dad. But I learned. Without you. For a moment, we just glared at each other, years of buried pain thick between us. Then I saw it, the folder open on his desktop labeled Trust Revision. My pulse spiked. What's that? He followed my gaze and laughed bitterly. Something you'll never see. Before he could close it, I lunged forward, hitting the keys. The screen blinked, revealing scanned legal documents. A draft will. My father's signature is already there. And next to it, the words that froze my blood. Beneficiary, Andrew Matthews. Of course, I whispered. The golden child gets the inheritance. The scapegoat gets erased. He smirked. You made your choice when you betrayed this family. I took a step back, heart pounding. You always said family was everything. Turns out it's just another business decision. He pointed at me. You don't deserve a cent of what I've built. I smiled coldly. Good. I didn't come for money, he frowned. Then what did you come for? The truth, I said. And it's already mine. I turned and walked out before he could answer, my hands shaking but my stride steady. Back upstairs, I texted Patricia. Me. He's drafting a new will, trying to cut me out completely, Patricia. Let him. Every change he makes under pressure strengthens your case if this goes legal. Record everything. I did. From that night on, I kept my phone on record whenever I was near him. Every argument, every confession, every threat captured, documented, stored in encrypted files. By evening, Andrew came knocking again. You made him worse, he said, barging in. He's unraveling Claire. The facade is gone. He's just... rage. If you don't walk this back, he'll disinherit me. He's already drafting a new will. Me, Claire. Not just you anymore. He rubbed his temples. Do you ever stop? You've got your fame, your cover, your moral victory. Let it go before you burn the whole family down. I looked at him. Really looked. The exhaustion, the fear, the reflection of everything I'd lived under for years. Maybe the family needs to burn, I said quietly. Maybe that's how you start clean. He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. You sound just like him. No, I said, picking up my phone. I sound like the person he was afraid I'd become. He left without another word. That night the snow fell harder. I sat by the window scrolling through the recording app replaying my father's voice. You'll regret this. You don't deserve a cent. You're worthless. But there was something else now, something new, his desperation. It was proof. Evidence of a man losing his empire, his mask, his control. Patricia's words echoed in my head. Record everything. I pressed save, labeling the file. The price of truth. I watched the estate lights flicker in the storm, the grand old house looking fragile under the weight of so many secrets. Somewhere below, my father was rewriting his will, his hand shaking with rage. But I no longer needed to watch him. The proof of his cruelty, of his desperation, was in my hands. I had come home for justice, and in a twisted way I had found it. The family I had so desperately wanted to belong to was finally exposed for what it was, a business built on lies, and now a wreck. And the price for that truth. It was the final quiet recognition that I didn't need them to be whole. I was already whole, all on my own. We called it Project Karma because it wasn't revenge anymore. It was a correction. Patricia and I sat across from each other at her old oak table, 2 cold coffees between us, surrounded by documents that could dismantle an empire. Timing is everything, she said, tapping the file in front of her. We file the contest papers the day the trust amendment is registered. If he acts under pressure, it looks coerced. Panic makes mistakes. I nodded, tracing the edge of a paperclip. He's already panicking. The amendment is his safety net. She slid a USB drive toward me. Everything you found, scans, audio bank trails, is backed up and encrypted. I've spoken to a federal investigator. We're ready. The only question is how far you're willing to take this. As far as it takes, I said. The plan was simple in theory. Catch him rewriting the trust document, the pressure, and let the system turn on him. A procedural trap, clean and legal, his empire would fold under its own deceit. You really want to file this on his birthday? Patricia asked, half smiling. It's poetic, I said. He'll think it's sentimental. He won't see it coming. For days I played the dutiful daughter again, smiling at charity dinners, nodding through hollow conversations with people who'd once called me worthless. But beneath the calm surface, I was documenting everything. Every whisper, every offhand comment, every digital receipt. Revenge wasn't chaos anymore, it was strategy. At one gala, Julian leaned toward me across a room full of champagne and hypocrisy. Your calm is disarming, he said. Beautiful use of optics. Optics don't win justice, I answered. Evidence does. We filed the freeze request on Thursday morning. By noon, Patricia had delivered the paperwork. By nightfall, the boardroom lights in Matthews Media burned late into the evening. The empire that once felt untouchable began to crack not with noise, but with the quiet hum of lawyers, auditors, and fear. Headlines shifted like weather. Matthews Trust, frozen pending inquiry. Daughter's allegations, trigger internal audit. For the first time, my father's name wasn't synonymous with control, it was synonymous with scandal. That night, Andrew appeared at my door. His tie was crooked, his face pale. You're killing us, he said, voice shaking. Dad's losing it. He's calling everyone, threatening lawsuits. He'll take everything down before he lets you win. Then let him, I said softly. His jaw clenched. You really think you're the hero in this? You're just like him, cold calculated. Maybe, I said. But at least I'm honest about it. When he left, I sat on the floor of my room, back against the bed, the glow of my laptop reflecting in the dark. Patricia messaged me a single line. He's drafting a new will. Check his computer. Minutes later, I was in his study. The door was unlocked, the room lit only by the screen's blue light. He wasn't there. His chair sat pushed back, still warm. I found the folder Instantly Trust Revision. My pulse quickened as I opened it. A draft will. His signature already scrawled at the bottom. And beside it, the words that made the room tilt beneath me, Beneficiary Andrew Matthews. For a moment the text blurred. My throat tightened, as if the air had been sucked from the room. This wasn't about money. It was about being erased. I thought of every Christmas dinner every time he'd look through me as if I were furniture. A hollow laugh escaped before I could stop it. So this was my inheritance absence signed in ink. I scrolled down the page, eyes burning. The rest was cold legal language, but all I saw was that one word excluded. It was the punctuation mark on a lifetime of dismissal. Then something in me steadied. Anger didn't burn anymore. It crystallized. Fine. Let him sign it. Let him carve my name out of his empire. He'd just given me proof intent pressure motive. When I closed the file, I noticed another folder open in the corner of the desktop transfers. Inside were bank statements, large withdrawals offshores, false charities, proof of manipulation disguised as business. My hands shook, but not from fear. From control. Receipts, I whispered. Always keep receipts. Back in my room, I called Patricia. He's rewriting the will and moving money, I said. Her tone didn't waver. Then we've got him. Record everything. From this point on, nothing happens off the record. I started that night. Every conversation, every sound, even silence. By morning, the fallout had begun. The board was fracturing, investors were retreating, and journalists were circling like hawks. The machine he'd built was eating itself. That afternoon, a courier delivered an unmarked envelope. Inside a single photograph, my father frail in a hospital bed, eyes half open. A sticky note read, "Stop before you destroy him." I stared at it longer than I should have. It didn't look like the man who'd called me worthless. It looked like an old man drowning in the ruins of his own ambition. For a second, I almost felt pity. Then I remembered the years I spent begging for mercy that never came. Patricia texted, "Ignore it. He's using illness as leverage." We proceed. She was right. Compassion didn't mean surrender. Truth wasn't cruelty. Later that night, Andrew called a family meeting. We gathered in the drawing room, the same one where we'd posed for Christmas photos years ago. Evelyn sat silent, clutching a handkerchief. Andrew paced. "We're hemorrhaging clients," he said. "If this keeps up, the company collapses. You've made your point, Claire. End it before there's nothing left to inherit." "Inherit," I repeated. "There's nothing worth inheriting, only something left to rebuild." The silence that followed was thick, fragile. My mother's eyes shimmered, but she said nothing. When they left, I stayed behind, staring at the portraits on the wall, my father shaking hands with senators, my brother with trophies, my mother smiling like she was paid to, and me always on the edge of the frame. That night I opened my drawer and looked again at the photograph of my father in that hospital bed. The guilt came and went like a wave. But beneath it, a deeper truth settled: justice is never clean. It leaves residue, ashes, and relief in equal measure. I slipped the photo back inside the envelope and placed it beside the USB drives. Together, they were the record of everything this family had tried to hide, the ledger of power, silence, and survival. Patricia called again just before midnight. "We've got enough to freeze all primary accounts," she said. "Tomorrow we will file for an interim trustee. Be ready, he'll lash out." "I know," I said. But not for long. After we hung up, I stood at the window. Snow had begun again, soft, relentless, coating the estate in white. The house looked peaceful from a distance, but I knew better. Peace was just another word for the aftermath. Still, as I watched the flakes drift down over the iron gates and frozen fountain, I felt something close to calm. Maybe this was what justice really looked like. Not fireworks, not fury. Just a quiet correction. The trap was set. The empire was trembling. And somewhere in that silence I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Revenge hadn't hollowed me out. It had cleared space. For truth. For peace. for whatever came next. The reading of the will was supposed to be a formality. That's what Patricia told me as we drove through the sleet-covered streets toward the Matthews Law offices downtown. "He's cornered," she said, her voice steady, hands tight on the steering wheel. "He'll do what cornered men always do, try to rewrite history with a pen." The city was quiet under a layer of ice, the world holding its breath. When we pulled into the underground garage, my stomach turned. I hadn't set foot in those offices since I was 22 when my father made me sign a non-compete clause that practically banned me from breathing near his empire. Now I was walking back through the same glass doors not as the outcast, but as the threat. The receptionist looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. "Miss Matthews," she stammered. "Mr. Matthews is expecting you." I didn't reply. I just followed the long corridor of polished marble to the conference room at the end. The door was already open. Inside sat my father, Andrew Evelyn, and two attorneys I didn't recognize. My father's face was thinner, his suit looser. There was a faint tremor in his hand as he poured water into a crystal glass, but his eyes still carried the same edge that had once terrified boardrooms. "Claire," he said evenly, like we were business partners about to negotiate a merger instead of a reckoning. "Glad you could make it." I sat opposite him, Patricia at my side. The elder of the two attorneys, Mr. Wallace, according to his nameplate, cleared his throat. "We're here to finalize Mr. Matthews' estate documents and verify the presence of all named beneficiaries." Beneficiaries. That word tasted like ash. Charles Matthews leaned back, his smile a practiced mask. "I thought it would be better to do this while we're all still civil." I didn't respond. Wallace adjusted his glasses and began reading. Under the revised terms of the Matthews Family Trust, dated December 19th, the estate and all business holdings shall be transferred to— He paused, glancing up. "Andrew Matthews." Andrew straightened slightly, feigning surprise. Evelyn's lips pressed together. Patricia's pen froze mid-note. I didn't move. I already knew. Wallace continued, "However, should any pending investigations result in criminal or ethical violations tied to the Matthews Media Group, those holdings will transfer to a secondary trustee, Claire Matthews." The room went dead silent. Andrew turned sharply. "What the hell is this?" I looked at my father. He wasn't smiling anymore. "It's called foresight," he said. "If the vultures tear the company apart, at least one of my children should have the chance to rebuild it." Patricia spoke first. "So you're admitting guilt then?" He glared at her. "Don't twist my words. It's a contingency. Nothing more." I leaned forward, my voice low. "You think a clause will save your legacy? You're just shifting blame onto whoever's left standing." "Better you than strangers," he snapped. I laughed, quiet, humorless. "You still don't get it. I don't want your empire." "Then why are you here?" "Because you made me this way," I said. "You taught me to fight, to keep receipts, to never let anyone silence me. So here I am." His jaw clenched, but before he could speak, Patricia slid a folder across the table. "Mr. Matthews," she said, her tone cool and measured. "Before we go further, you should be aware that we have copies of bank withdrawals, internal memos, and a recorded conversation between you and your financial advisor dated last Thursday. Evidence that supports misuse of trust assets and intentional concealment." The attorneys froze. Andrew went pale. "You're bluffing," my father said. Patricia opened the folder, revealing a printed transcript. "Not today." I watched him read the first lines. His knuckles whitened on the page. "This is illegal," he muttered. "No," Patricia said evenly. "This is accountability." He slammed the folder shut. "You think this will hold up in court?" "It doesn't have to," I said. "It just has to hold up long enough for the truth to spread." Andrew stood suddenly. "Enough, both of you. You're turning this into a circus while Dad's sick." "Sick doesn't mean innocent," I said quietly. He rounded on me, face red. "You've wanted to destroy us since you left." "Admit it." "I didn't destroy this family," I said. "He did. I'm just making sure the world knows how." "Claire," my mother's voice cracked, trembling. "Please stop. This isn't that," I said, looking at her, "fair? You watched him tear us apart for decades. You watched him belittle me until I believed him. You said nothing. You did nothing. And now you want peace," her eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. Patricia slid another document forward a flash drive in a sealed envelope. "Before we close, there's one more item. A digital file recovered from the Matthews estate servers. We'll let the forensic auditors decide its significance." My father looked at it like it was a weapon. "What file?" he demanded. "An email," Patricia said, "from your personal account to a shell corporation in Zurich. The transfer memo references the name Horizon Charitable Fund." His eyes widened. For the first time, real fear cracked through his control. "You have no right." "We have every right," Patricia interrupted. "Your daughter's name is on the board of that charity. Without her knowledge, that's fraud." He went still. The mask slipped entirely. Evelyn gasped. "Charles, tell me that's not true." He didn't answer. The air left my lungs. I hadn't just been a ghost in this family. I had been a prop. I looked at him, really looked. The man who'd once towered over my childhood now looked small, cornered, fragile beneath his tailored suit. "You used me," I said quietly. "You used my name to cover your lies." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Andrew sat down hard, face in his hands. "Jesus, Dad." The lawyer cleared his throat, voice barely steady. "Perhaps we should adjourn until—" "No," my father croaked. "Finish it." Wallace hesitated, then continued reading the final clause. "All personal property, real estate, and secondary assets not bound to the corporate trust shall transfer to the estate's executor for evaluation pending review." Patricia leaned in. Executor Wallace nodded. "Claire Matthews." The silence that followed felt endless. My father's eyes found mine full of something between fury and triumph. "You think you've won," he whispered. "But when you sit in that chair, you'll understand. It's not a victory. It's a prison. You'll be nothing but a warden for what's left. It's a curse." Maybe I said softly, "But at least it'll be mine." The meeting ended without goodbyes. The sound of chairs scraping papers, folding, the faint tremor of glass as Evelyn's hand shook. I gathered the files and stood. As I reached the door, I paused and turned back. "You once told me I'd never amount to anything I said. But you were wrong. I just didn't need you to do it." Then I left him sitting there beneath the weight of his empire alone, surrounded by the paperwork of his own downfall. Outside, the snow had turned to freezing rain. Patricia and I walked in silence until we reached the car. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. That was the moment. What moment? "When you stopped being his daughter," she said, "and became his legacy." I looked back at the building one last time. The windows glowed faintly through the storm, like candles burning for a house that didn't know it was already gone. "He wanted control," I said quietly. "He got a witness. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a victim of his world. I felt like its reckoning." The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It drummed against the windows of the estate like a reminder, constant, relentless, refusing to fade. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face while reading, pale and furious, his voice cracking when he realized I wasn't bluffing anymore. Patricia's voice echoed in my head, echoed everything. So I did. By the time the rain broke, I had hours of audio files, snippets of conversation, phone calls, confessions, disguised as threats. Each one a piece of the puzzle that would finally expose him for what he was. The final one came by accident. It was late Thursday night when Andrew showed up at my door. His suit was rumpled tie, loosened eyes, bloodshot. "He's getting worse," he said before I could speak. "He barely leaves his office. He's talking to himself now. Keeps saying people are watching him." "People are watching him," I said. He laughed bitterly. "You really don't have any mercy left, do you?" "Mercy didn't save me when I needed it." He hesitated, rubbing his forehead. "Mom wants you to talk to him." I froze. "Why?" "She thinks you're the only one he still listens to." That almost made me laugh. He never listened to me a day in his life. Maybe that's why he might now. He left me with that, standing in the doorway, looking like a man who'd run out of defenses. I didn't agree right away. I told myself I'd never step into his office again, that there was nothing left to say. But sometime around midnight, I found myself standing outside that same heavy oak door, my phone already recording in my pocket. He was there, slouched behind his desk, staring at a wall of financial reports and legal notices, the remnants of an empire collapsing in slow motion. The lamp cast long shadows across the room, making him look older, smaller. "You shouldn't be here," he said without turning. "Neither should you," I replied. He snorted softly. "You think you've won, don't you?" "I didn't come here to win," I said. "I came here to understand why." He finally looked up, eyes rimmed red. "Why what? Why did you hate me so much?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He leaned back, the old confidence flickering for a second before fading into exhaustion. "I didn't hate you," he said. "You reminded me of me." "Then why spend my whole life trying to break me?" "Because you didn't fear me," he said flatly. "And fear keeps people loyal." I stared at him, stunned by the honesty. "That's all it ever was to you, wasn't it? Loyalty, control. You don't love anyone, you just own them." He looked away, jaw tightening. "Love is a luxury for people who can afford to lose." I took a step closer. "And what did you lose, Dad?" He didn't answer right away. Then with a small, bitter laugh, he said, "Everything. I just didn't realize it until now." The silence between us felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Then he reached into his drawer and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the desk. "I was going to send this to you," he said. "But since you're here—" I opened it carefully. Inside was a single USB drive. "What's this proof?" he said. "Of what they did. Of what I did." My pulse quickened. "What's on it?" "Recordings. Documents. Meetings I shouldn't have had, deals I shouldn't have signed. I thought keeping them would protect me someday. Maybe it'll protect you instead." I hesitated, searching his face for a lie. "Why give this to me now?" "Because you're the only one who'll know what to do with it," he said quietly. "And because you'll make sure the right people suffer." That wasn't an apology, it was permission. "Do you even realize what you're saying?" I asked. "This could destroy everything that's left of you." He smiled faintly. "Everything that's left of me deserves to be destroyed." He leaned back, closing his eyes like he was suddenly too tired to hold himself upright. "Leave it on the desk when you're done," he murmured. "Done with what?" "Recording me," he said, a faint smirk playing at his lips. "You think I don't know?" My breath caught. "Let me guess," he continued, eyes still closed. "You started the night of the Time cover, right? Every conversation, every threat, every word I said that could hang me." I said nothing. He opened his eyes again, and for a moment, I saw something raw in them. Not anger, not pride. Surrender. "Good," he said softly. "Someone should keep a record." He reached for his glass, took a slow sip of water, then whispered almost to himself, "Maybe that's all I ever wanted. For someone to remember what really happened." The rest of the night was a blur. He fell asleep at his desk. I took the USB and slipped out my phone, still recording, in my pocket. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard the clock in the foyer chime 1 a.m. The sound echoed through the house like a countdown. When I reached my room, I plugged the drive into my laptop. The folders were labeled EM Holdings Horizon Confidential, and one that made my stomach twist, Claire. Inside were dozens of audio files, email drafts, and scanned documents. Contracts signed under pseudonyms, wire transfers to politicians, evidence of corporate manipulation. But the last file stopped me cold. It was an audio recording, dated Christmas Eve 5 years ago. My hands trembled as I pressed play. My father's voice filled the room, cold and familiar, saying that I'd never amount to anything, that I was worthless. And then another voice, my mother's, quiet pleading. "Charles, please stop. She's just a child." The sound of her fear was 1,000 times more painful than his fury. He laughed. "A child who needs to learn her place." The sound of something shattering followed, maybe a glass, maybe something else. Then footsteps and the slam of a door. I stopped the playback, breathing hard. The file ended there, abrupt, incomplete. But it was enough. Proof not just of corruption, but of cruelty. Proof of who he'd always been. By morning, I sent copies of the USB to Patricia and to a trusted contact at Time. Not for revenge, not even for justice, but for truth. The kind of truth that can't be rewritten. At 9 a.m., the call came. Patricia's voice was calm, but her tone carried weight. "Claire, there's been an incident." I knew before she said it. "He collapsed this morning," she said. "Cardiac arrest. They're taking him to St. Helena's now." I didn't speak. "Do you want to come?" I looked at the computer screen at the paused waveform of his voice frozen mid-sentence. Then I closed the laptop slowly. "No," I said. "Not yet." After she hung up, I sat in silence, listening to the faint hum of the house, the same house that had heard every cruel word, every lie, every silence. Then I whispered, barely audible, "Now the world will know who you really were." And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt the heavy, aching calm that comes when the war is finally over. The church smelled like cedar and cold rain. Outside, the snow had turned to sleet again, melting into gray puddles that reflected the stained glass windows. Inside, the pews were lined with people dressed in black, reporters, business partners, lawyers, and neighbors, pretending to grieve a man they'd only ever feared. I stood in the back, not because I wanted to hide, but because it felt wrong to sit near the front. I wasn't part of his family anymore. Maybe I never had been. Andrew was standing near the altar jaw, set his tie slightly crooked. Evelyn sat beside him, hands clasped so tightly around a handkerchief that her knuckles were white. The pastor spoke softly, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling, but I didn't hear a word of it. My mind was somewhere else, still replaying that final recording, the last conversation, the weight of his words. Patricia had wanted me to skip the service. "You don't owe him that," she'd said. But it wasn't about owing. It was about closure. When the eulogy began, I half expected someone to mention his empire, his philanthropy, the Matthews legacy. They did, of course. People always talk about legacy at funerals. It makes monsters sound human. Charles Matthews was a visionary, the speaker said. A man of immense ambition and dedication. I almost laughed. Dedication, yes, but not to people, to power, to image. Behind me, the whispering started. I could feel it ripple through the crowd like static. They'd all seen the articles, the leaked documents, the headlines that broke just days before his death, Matthews' empire under investigation. No one wanted to look at me directly. But they all knew who I was. The daughter who took him down. When the pastor finally said amen, people rose in silence, filing past the casket draped in lilies and steel-gray silk. His portrait rested on an easel beside it, his last corporate headshot, the perfect CEO smile frozen forever. I waited until the crowd thinned before walking down the aisle. The casket gleamed beneath the soft light, immaculate and cold. I stared at it for a long time before whispering, "You finally got peace, Dad. The rest of us are still paying for it." A voice behind me broke the silence. "That's a hell of a thing to say at a funeral." I turned. It was Julian. Black suit reins still clinging to his hair, a faint smirk at the corner of his mouth. "You shouldn't be here," I said. "Neither should you," he replied. "But we both are." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The story's everywhere. The tapes, the bank records, the trust documents, it's all public now. Time's follow-up piece drops tomorrow." I nodded. "Good." Julian studied me for a moment. "He would have hated that picture they used," he said, gesturing toward the portrait. "He always wanted to be remembered as untouchable." "Then this is fitting," I said quietly. As the last of the guests filtered out, Evelyn rose from her pew, her face pale and drawn. For a second our eyes met. She hesitated, then walked toward me, her heels clicking softly against the marble. "I suppose congratulations are in order," she said, voice brittle. "You got what you wanted." "I didn't want this," I said. "Didn't you?" I looked at her, really looked the tremor in her hands, the exhaustion carved into her skin. He built his life on lies. Someone had to end it. She smiled faintly, but it wasn't kind. "And what did it cost you, Claire?" Do you think you're free now? The word free felt hollow. I had taken down his empire, but the foundation was still standing inside me. Before I could answer, Patricia appeared at the back of the room, signaling me over. "The press is gathering outside," she whispered when I reached her. "They'll want a statement." I shook my head. "Not today. You should control the narrative before someone else does." I looked toward the casket one last time. The narrative's already written. We left through the side door, the air sharp and wet. Flashbulbs exploded as soon as we stepped out. Cameras, microphones shouted questions. "Claire, did you know about your father's crimes? Was it revenge or justice? How does it feel to be the heiress of a fallen empire?" Patricia tried to shield me, but I raised my hand. "One statement," I said. The crowd fell silent, pens and recorders poised. "My father built something powerful," I began. "And he believed power made him untouchable. But power without integrity is just a weapon. He used it to hurt people, including his own family. The truth coming out isn't revenge, it's accountability. And I intend to make sure his victims get the justice he denied them." I didn't take questions. I didn't look back. We got into Patricia's car and drove in silence until the city skyline disappeared behind us. Only then did she speak. "You handled that perfectly. Calm, direct. You look like someone in control." "I'm not," I said softly. "I just learned how to fake it." She gave me a sidelong look. "You've inherited more than his fortune, Claire. You've inherited the responsibility to fix what he broke. That means staying strong when the cameras turn off." The word inheritance hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just about money or property, it was about legacy, about what you choose to carry and what you leave buried. We arrived back at the estate late that afternoon. The house felt different, quieter, emptier. His office door stood open for the first time in years. Inside, the desk was bare except for a single envelope addressed in his sharp handwriting to my daughter. I hesitated before opening it. The letter was short, written in the same clipped style he'd used in business memos. "Claire, you were right about me. About everything. I built an empire out of fear and it turned to dust because that's all it ever was. You wanted truth. Here it is, you were never worthless. You were the one thing I couldn't control. And that terrified me. Do what I couldn't, make something honest out of the ruins. Dad." The paper trembled in my hands. I hadn't cried in years, but a single tear slipped down my cheek, hot against my skin. It wasn't for him. It was for the 16-year-old girl who had believed his every word. Patricia appeared in the doorway, silent for a moment. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," I said truthfully. "Maybe for the first time I am." She nodded, her expression softening. "Then it's time to decide what comes next." "What comes next?" I asked. Her eyes met mine. "Redemption." That night the house creaked in the wind. I sat by the window watching the snow fall again, the letter still in my lap. For the first time, the word revenge didn't feel like victory. It felt like a release. The man who once called me worthless had left me with everything he never could: freedom, truth, and a choice. Outside, the storm began to quiet. The lights of the estate flickered, and in their reflection, I saw not the shadow of who he'd been, but the faint, unsteady outline of who I was becoming. The next chapter of the Matthews name wouldn't be built on fear. It would be built on truth.
The morning after the boardroom vote, the house was too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you hear every creak in the floorboards, every whisper of air. I sat by the window with a mug of coffee gone cold, watching the gray January light spill through the frost. My reflection looked older, sharper, someone I almost recognized but didn't fully know yet. Patricia called at 7. "The press wants an official statement," she said, "and the auditors want your signature on the restructuring proposal. Once you sign it, becomes real. Real. I repeated softly. Funny word. Funny or not. It's time, she replied. Today you start running what's left of the empire you burned to the ground. She hung up before I could answer. I dressed in black again, not for mourning this time, but for armor. As I drove through the city, the billboards that once carried my father's empire slogans now bore news headlines. Matthews Media, under ethical review, daughter takes control, reckoning at the top.
It didn't feel like victory. It felt like Judgment Day. The lobby of the headquarters was packed with cameras when I arrived. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes went off like lightning. Claire, are you taking responsibility for the company's failures? Are you planning to liquidate your father's holdings? Was this revenge or justice? I didn't stop. I walked straight to the elevator, each step echoing against the marble. My heart was steady. My hands were not. Upstairs, Patricia was already waiting with her usual calm. She gestured toward the table where the documents were neatly arranged: trust modifications, asset freezes, legal confirmations of my new title. Before we start, she said, "There's something you should see." She slid a tablet across the desk. On the screen was an email from a name I hadn't heard in years: Ethan Doyle. My breath caught. Ethan had been my mentor once before he'd been blacklisted for exposing one of my father's corporate shell games. The fallout had destroyed his career. The email was brief. "Claire, you did what no one else could. The story isn't over yet. Check the enclosed file before you sign anything." ED attached was a single video clip. I pressed play. The footage was grainy but clear enough. My father sat in a leather chair, pale thinner than I remembered. A timestamp in the corner read, December 20th, 2024, 5 days before his death. He looked straight into the camera. "If you're watching this," he said hoarsely, "then the truth has already come out. I want to make something clear. Claire wasn't wrong." He paused, breathing shallowly. But she wasn't right either. He shifted, coughing. "I built something powerful, yes. And I corrupted it. But power doesn't vanish, it transfers. My children will decide what to do with it now. Andrew will try to save it. Claire will try to cleanse it. Both will fail if they forget this. You can't destroy legacy. You can only inherit it differently." The clip ended abruptly. For a long moment I couldn't move. Patricia exhaled slowly. "Well, that's something." He knew I whispered. He knew it would come to this. She placed a hand on my arm. "Then maybe this is his last manipulation. Don't let him define your next move." I nodded, closing the tablet. "Let's finish this." We entered the boardroom for the final signing. The air was tense, the directors subdued. They all looked at me differently now, not as the outcast daughter, but as the woman holding the pen that could erase decades of deceit. Andrew wasn't there. His seat sat empty, papers untouched. Before I sign, I said I want to make one thing clear. This company doesn't belong to my father anymore. It doesn't belong to me either. It belongs to the truth. No one spoke. I signed each page slowly, deliberately. Every stroke of the pen felt like closing a wound that had festered for years. When the last signature was done, Patricia gathered the documents and handed them to the notary. "It's official," she said quietly. "You're now the legal head of Matthews Media Holdings." The room didn't erupt in applause. There was no triumph. Just silence, the kind that comes after a storm when you realize the landscape will never look the same again. As we left, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass door, the daughter who had once been told she was worthless, now walking out as the CEO of her father's empire. The irony was almost poetic. That evening I drove back to the estate alone. The sun was setting bleeding gold across the snow. I parked by the fountain, now frozen like everything else he'd built, and went inside. The study door creaked open easily now. His desk was still empty, but something glimmered beneath the lamp, a small flash drive taped to the underside of the drawer. I peeled it off and plugged it into my laptop. One folder appeared for Claire. Inside was a single document. Last addendum to the Matthews Trust. The date matched the day before his death. My pulse quickened as I opened it. Effective immediately, All remaining personal property, including real estate, unlisted assets, and intellectual holdings, shall transfer to the Matthews Foundation for Ethical Innovation to be managed under the sole discretion of Claire Matthews. I blinked. A foundation? He'd created a trust in my name. Patricia's voice echoed in my head from earlier that day. He'll try to control the future even from the grave. Maybe he had. Or maybe for once he'd finally tried to make it right. The last line of the addendum stopped me cold. Redemption is not inherited, Claire. It's built. I stared at those words until the letters blurred. Then for the first time in years, I let myself cry not from anger, not from grief, but from something in between. When the tears finally stopped, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped onto the balcony. The wind was sharp clean, and the sky was streaked with stars. Below, the frozen fountain gleamed like glass. My phone buzzed. It was Patricia again. "You did it," she said. "The world's reacting. Time wants a follow-up interview, the heiress who changed an empire." I smiled faintly. Let them write whatever they want. The story's not about me anymore. "What's it about, then?" she asked. "About what comes after power," I said. I ended the call and stood there in the cold, watching the lights flicker across the city in the distance. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. Redemption wasn't a headline. It was a process. Tomorrow, I'd announce the formation of the foundation. Tomorrow, I'll start rebuilding, but tonight, for the first time in a long time, I let myself simply exist. The girl who had once been called worthless had inherited not her father's empire, but his final lesson that control dies but truth endures. And that sometimes justice isn't loud. It's silent. It's standing in the ruins of everything that broke you and realizing you survived it. The morning the press release went live, the phones wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews, old colleagues wanted statements, and investors wanted reassurance that Matthews Media wasn't dead, it was reborn. But it wasn't Matthews Media I cared about anymore. It was what came next. The Matthews Foundation for Ethical Innovation. My father's final chess move restructured into my first. I sat in the boardroom where the company's dirtiest secrets had once been written into policy and looked around at the people who'd agreed to join me. Patricia, of course, sharp as ever. Her calm steadiness grounding the chaos. Julian, now officially our head of outreach, with that careful smile that still read between the lines of my silences. And 3 new faces. Activists, journalists, survivors of the kind of corporate abuse my father's empire had once buried under paperwork. We were a strange team, but we were exactly what was needed. "Our first grant goes to the Whitley Project," I said, sliding the folder across the table. "They've been fighting media censorship for years. My father blacklisted them personally in 2019. It's time that changed." Patricia smiled faintly. "Poetic." Julian leaned back in his chair. "Karma, too. Your father once used the word reputation management. I guess you're redefining it." "Not reputation," I said. "Redemption." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. As the meeting ended, Patricia lingered behind. "You're doing something extraordinary, Claire," she said softly, "turning what was broken into something that heals." I looked out the window at the city skyline. The same skyline my father had once ruled from, now reflected in glass towers, bearing names I intended to change. "It doesn't feel like healing yet," I said. "It feels like survival." "That's what healing is," she said. By noon, the story broke. Claire Matthews launches Foundation to Reform Corporate Ethics. Time ran the headline with a photo of me standing beside the foundation logo, a minimalist phoenix rising from ash. The caption read, "From worthless to watchdog." I didn't cry, but my chest tightened. That word, worthless. It had once been a scar. Now it was a crown I'd melted down and reforged. The backlash came fast, of course. It always does. Critics accused me of laundering my family's sins. Commentators called it performative philanthropy. Some even accused me of exploiting my father's death for fame. Every insult was a variation of the same old tune, a woman doesn't earn redemption, she inherits it through a man. But that didn't matter anymore. I had lived with those words my whole life, and now they were meaningless. Late one evening, after the office cleared out, I walked to the archives, the part of the building we'd kept untouched where the past still lived in boxes. The air was cold and smelled like dust and secrets. Rows of file cabinets stood like tombstones. One drawer caught my eye. Matthew C., employee file. I opened it. Inside were the records of my early employment at the company. The short, humiliating years when my father had kept me on staff to learn discipline. Notes in his handwriting filled the margins of performance reports. Too emotional. Lacks composure. Unfit for leadership. I laughed quietly, the sound bouncing off the metal drawers. Then I took out my phone, snapped a photo, and sent it to Patricia. Me. Frame this for the lobby. Patricia. You're joking. Me. Dead serious. Call it historical context. I replaced the file and closed the drawer with a click. Some ghosts deserve to be documented. The next morning, the foundation received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a thumb drive and a single-typed note for the record. He wasn't the only one. Patricia and I exchanged a look. The drive contained dozens of recordings, executive meetings from the early years of the company. I recognized my father's voice, but there were others too. Senators, media moguls, investors. Conversations about suppressing exposés. Funding smear campaigns, manipulating public data. It was worse than I'd imagined. My father hadn't just been part of corruption, he'd built an ecosystem of it. Do we release this? Patricia asked, her voice steady, but eyes sharp. I stared at the monitor, the weight of it pressing against my ribs. If we released it, we'd burn every bridge we'd just begun rebuilding. Every ally we'd gained would scatter. But if we buried it, we'd become him. I thought of that last line in his letter, "Redemption is not inherited." It's built. Release it, I said. Patricia nodded once. Understood. Within 48 hours, it was everywhere. The leak went viral, setting off congressional inquiries and shareholder withdrawals. Politicians distanced themselves. Corporate allies issued statements of shock, and talk shows dissected the moral irony of a daughter finishing what her father started. But the reaction went beyond headlines. The public, tired of being lied to, had found a voice. Our foundation became an epicenter of a grassroots movement. People started organizing, using our platform to share their own stories of corporate injustice. It wasn't just a foundation anymore. It was a beacon. From a trickle of information, a torrent was forming, ready to wash away a generation of secrets. Julian called me that night. You realize you've just declared war on an entire generation of powerful men, I'm aware, I said. And you're ready for what comes next. I thought about it, watching the city lights flicker outside my window. I was born in the fire, Julian. I just learned how to use it. He chuckled softly. God, you sound like him. No, I said quietly. I sound like what he could have been if he'd ever told the truth. The foundation became both a symbol and a scandal overnight. Protesters gathered outside the building, some praising, some condemning. Anonymous threats appeared in our inboxes. My name trended again, this time next to words like traitor, heroine, madwoman. But amid the chaos, something extraordinary happened. Whistleblowers from other corporations began sending documents. Activists reached out with collaborations. A network of truth-tellers formed almost overnight, people tired of silence. One message stood out. It was from Ethan Doyle. I owe you, I typed back. His reply came almost instantly, yo. You don't. You owe the truth. The next week was a blur of lawyers, financial investigators, and sleepless nights. We uncovered a web of offshore trusts disguised as charitable endowments. Inside them, millions diverted over decades meant for political lobbying and media control. Patricia's words came back to me. He'll try to control the future, even from the grave. Not anymore. By Friday, the last of the accounts were seized and transferred into the foundation. Funds once used to manipulate the world would now rebuild it. That evening, as the snow began to fall again, I stood on the roof of the building, watching the city glow beneath me. Below me, the city pulsed. The foundation's lights burned bright against the night, a beacon built from ashes and truth. I no longer felt like I was standing in his shadow. I was part of this new light. Patricia joined me quietly, handing me a glass of champagne. "To your father," she said. "And to the Empire, he accidentally made it honest." I smiled faintly. "No, to everyone who was told they were worthless and proved the world wrong." We clinked glasses, the sound crisp against the wind. Somewhere I imagined he was watching. Maybe not proud, but finally silent. And for the first time, I felt that silence wasn't absent. It was peaceful. I didn't expect the call from Time. I thought our story was done. But when the editor's name flashed across my phone, something deep in my chest knew it wasn't over yet. "Claire," he said, his tone almost reverent, "we're doing our annual issue, People Who Change the Year. We want you on the cover." For a second, I couldn't speak. "You're serious?" "Completely. You dismantled an empire, exposed corruption across 3 industries, and built a foundation that's changing corporate ethics. You've become the face of accountability." I looked out the window of the foundation's office. The city skyline gleamed under a pale winter sun, sharp and cold. "When would you need me tomorrow?" "We'd like to shoot at the estate, symbolism, legacy, that sort of thing. And Claire, the headline we're considering is The World's Youngest Innovator." I let out a quiet laugh, one part disbelief, one part relief. My father would hate that. "Then it's perfect," the editor said. After the call, I just sat there for a long time, staring at the snow drifting outside. That title, The World's Youngest Innovator. Once upon a time, I would have given anything to hear him call me that. But he never did. He called me worthless instead. Now the world would print the word innovator under my face. That night, Patricia and I drove back to the estate. It had been months since I'd stayed there, but the house still felt alive with memory, the ticking grandfather clock, the faint scent of cedar, the echo of footsteps on marble floors. "This is where it all started," Patricia said softly. "And where it ended," I replied. She smiled faintly. "Maybe it has not ended, maybe transformed." The photo team arrived early the next morning. They moved quietly through the house, setting up lights and cameras. The lead photographer, a calm man with silver hair, asked, "Do you want to do the shoot in his study?" I hesitated, then nodded. Yes, that's where the truth lived. We entered the study together. The desk was just as I'd left it, polished bare, except for the framed letter he'd written to me, the one that ended with, "Redemption is not inherited, it's built." I didn't move it. The photographer adjusted his lens. "I want you standing right behind the desk," he said, hands on the chair. "Look into the camera like you're not asking for permission anymore." I did as he said. The lights flashed. Click, click, click. Each shot felt like a reclamation, every glare of the bulb like striking a match against the dark corners of my past. Between takes, Patricia stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching. When the team paused to change angles, she said, "You know this image will follow you for the rest of your life, right?" "I know," I said. "But so will his shadow." "I'd rather choose the light." The photographer smiled. "That's your quote right there." Hours later, after the crew packed up, I stayed behind in the study. The house had fallen into that familiar stillness again. I walked around the room, tracing my fingers over the spines of his books, the edges of old photographs, the faint scratches on the floor where his chair had always scraped the same spot. Then I saw it, a small, almost invisible mark on the wall behind the bookshelf. I pressed it, and the panel clicked open. Inside was a narrow compartment filled with old VHS tapes, labeled in his precise handwriting. "Boardroom meeting, 1998, private interview. Whitney, personal." I felt a chill as I lifted the last one. No date. Just that single word, personal. Curiosity got the better of me. I found an old player in the storage room, plugged it into the TV, and pressed play. The screen flickered, and there he was. My father, decades younger, sitting in this very room. His face was softer than, not yet hardened by greed or pride. "If you're watching this," he said, "you're my child." My breath caught. "I made mistakes," he continued. You'll probably spend your life cleaning them up. But I want you to know something before you do. Power isn't evil by itself. It's what people use to hide from fear. I spent my life terrified of being small, of being forgotten. Don't make that your inheritance. He leaned closer to the camera. Don't build empires to prove your worth. Build bridges. And if one day the world calls you powerful, remember it's not power that redeems us. It's what we do with it after the fire. The tape ended abruptly, the screen going black. I sat there for a long time, unable to move. For the first time, I saw not the tyrant, not the manipulator, but the man. The one who'd buried his humanity under layers of armor, the one I'd spent my life trying not to become. And in that moment, I didn't forgive him, but I understood him. The next morning, the magazine cover dropped online. My phone buzzed nonstop. Messages poured in, congratulations, interviews, partnerships. When I opened the link there, it was Time, the world's youngest innovator, Claire Matthews, the daughter who turned her father's empire into a force for change. The photo showed me standing behind his desk, hands firm on the chair, eyes locked on the camera. Strong, calm, unapologetic. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then the calls started again. Network news, talk shows, politicians wanting to collaborate. But the one that surprised me most came from Andrew. He hadn't spoken to me since the day of the boardroom war. His voice on the phone was tired, almost wary. I saw the cover, he said. You did it. I didn't do it alone, I replied. Silence stretched between us. I miss her, he said finally. Mom, she's in Florida now. Keep the TV on mute when your name comes up. Says it hurts too much to hear it. I swallowed hard. Tell her I'm sorry for the way it ended. He hesitated. You did what none of us could. He would have hated it, but maybe he would have been proud too, in his own broken way. Maybe I said quietly, Goodbye, Andrew. Goodbye, Claire. After I hung up, I sat in the same chair my father had once ruled from. Outside, the estate was silent except for the soft crunch of snow on the driveway. The cover of Time lay open on the desk. I traced the letters of my own name, slowly remembering the night he called me worthless. The memory didn't sting anymore. It just existed like an old scar that no longer hurt when touched. Patricia knocked softly. They're waiting for you downstairs. The foundation gala starts in an hour. I smiled. I'll be there. She lingered a moment. You know, it's funny, she said. You started this story as the one seeking revenge. Now somehow you're the redemption arc. I stood adjusting my jacket. Revenge ends a story, I said. Redemption begins one. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face like a baptism. Reporters were already gathering by the gates, their flashes reflecting off the snow. For once I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I could still hear his voice, sharp, cruel, echoing from another Christmas long ago. Worthless. But this time, I smiled. Because I knew what came next. When Time printed my name beneath the world's youngest innovator. They didn't just rewrite my legacy, they buried him. And as the wind picked up scattering snow across the driveway like confetti, I realized something I hadn't before. I hadn't destroyed my father's empire. I'd transformed it. From fear into truth. From control into conscience. From a name into a movement. And that was my real inheritance. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. Maybe you've had your own ghost to face your own names to outgrow. I hope my story reminds you of one thing: you can't always choose where you come from. But you can choose what you build from the ashes. So tell me, if someone once called you worthless, what did you become instead?